So welcome to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with guests that are marketplace founders, operators, and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So if you're new to the group or watching this recording, these are actually informal chats where we get to talk with guests about their marketplace experiences, share unique insights, and then at the end, we also do a group Q&A for everyone that's with us on the Zoom. So this is actually episode 6. I'm excited to welcome Andrew Cunningham, who is currently the VP of Product at Outdoorsy and has previous product experiences at other marketplaces like VRBO. So Andrew, let's just start off by you maybe sharing more about your background and how you got into marketplaces.
Sure. So let's see. Prior to working at marketplaces, I was an analyst at Google. A lot of my career was spent in machine learning specifically.
Mm-hmm.
When I was at Google, I was working on display and search ads, specifically the ads quality score, which is one of the factors in actually calculating the price of an ad creative and placement and everything. So I worked there. I went over to Twitter to also work with their machine learning team. So I was a product manager over there as well. And I worked with Twitter's Cortex team, which is a deep learning team, and then an acquisition that they brought in called Magic Pony that focused on super resolved video content. So I worked on that for the first half of my career, and then I did a bit of a shift and started focusing more on consumer products. I went to VRBO, which is Airbnb's vacation rental platform, and worked there for a few years on a lot of different products. And ended up in a program called the President's Apprentice Program, which was kind of like an executive training program. And we got out of that, and I came over to Outdoorsy and started leading their product and product design teams. So, yeah, my career is roughly just kind of a split between machine learning and data science, and then pivoting into consumer products.
Nice, nice. So what kind of got you interested in Outdoorsy maybe and kind of making that transition over to join that team?
Yeah. Some of it's personal. Really like the outdoors, travel, camp a lot. Grew up with RVs in the family and just really enjoy them. I think there's a big opportunity there. And so when they started chatting with me, that was just exciting from a kind of a personal fulfillment perspective. And then also the business is great. It's growing. Especially now with COVID-19 and a lot of people socially distancing and not doing a lot of international travel. Domestic travel is growing a lot as well, and so it's been a big lift for the business, which has been pretty exciting.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything you can speak to as far as like some kind of maybe not exact numbers, but just so we can get an idea of how much it's increased recently?
Yeah. So I think our CEO shared this recently in a TechCrunch article, but I think it was the number he shared was like a 2,000% increase, over 2,000% increase from the low point of when everything was locked down and no one was traveling to now.
Oh wow!
And this was actually probably a month ago, so numbers are a bit different now.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you handle it right now? Just so we can get a sense as far as like the balance on supply and demand. Is it? I'm assuming that the demand far supersedes the supply. Is that correct or?
Yeah. So overall, right now, that's definitely the case. I think generally, in a lot of same with VRBO and HomeAway, you have supply constrained markets, demand constrained markets, and balancing the different markets spread across whatever territory you're managing. And either acquiring supply or demand in the right spots is, I think, one of the key parts to a big marketplace that's scaled, just understanding how to do that. So one key thing there is just looking at your utilization across the US or by geography, wherever you guys are, and understanding, are you supply constrained? Are you demand constrained? In what region? And what do you need to do? And I think for a lot of marketplaces, you have really probably top 10 markets where you make most of your money, and then it trails off pretty quickly after that, especially when you're starting out. And so understanding that utilization and supply and demand constraints across the market's really important, so that you guys, all these marketplaces can continue to grow, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the big challenges.
Nice. So can you maybe, so you're VP of product at Outdoorsy. So can you maybe share a little bit more about kind of how you guys think about, product there and maybe some of the ways that you look at data and kind of make decisions?
Yeah. So I think there's two main goals with product, right? One's kind of a business goal of growing the business, making revenue. The other big one that I think is probably the most important is satisfying user needs. So one of the things I'm really big on with the team is making sure that everything we're working on is actually solving a problem. So if you're a customer, what's the biggest pain point you're facing? What's the biggest problem you're facing? Because likely that's probably one of the biggest opportunities for the business. If you have really, I mean, if you just look at businesses in general, PayPal, for instance, right? There's a pain point of digital payments, and all of a sudden someone comes in, solves that problem really well,
Mhm.
and makes it easy. So I stress that. Also stress the scientific method with the team. So when we're looking at opportunities, making some observations, forming a hypothesis, and then proving it out is usually how I like to stress working, and that forces people to think about problems and then root them in metrics and data and user behavior. So definitely like to pursue that as well. And then as far as what metrics to look at, I think every marketplace is probably a little bit different. Every place I've ever worked has a different set of metrics. Obviously there's conversion, that's a big one, right? Everyone cares about what their conversion is site wide. When you split that apart though, I think it becomes a lot more interesting. So if you have a conversion funnel, what are your conversion rates between each page, and then from that page to full conversion? Looking at those metrics and understanding what the bigger levers are that you can pull, I think are really important. So that's another thing I'll do with the team. Talk about their opportunities within their space. So let's say you're looking at the demand side of a marketplace. There's a set of levers that you can pull to impact the business and achieve some business goals. So always stress and push them to do that.
Can we
And I think
jump into maybe a specific example of that? Just kind of talk through it.
Sure. I think a lot of people look at the conversion funnel specifically around checkout. So I think most of these marketplaces are monetizing their marketplaces. They're making money, and so you're looking at some sort of PDP page, and some sort of search experience probably, and then there's probably some sort of landing page that people are coming into the experience with, possibly, or maybe they're direct traffic straight into search, and then there's the checkout experience as well. So I think an example there would be, if you're trying to increase overall conversion, and you just have a, let's say 1% conversion rate to make it easy, from any visit to a completed transaction. That doesn't give you a lot of information, but when you start breaking the composites down, you might notice that from search to the PDP view, there's a big drop off. So you might have, a 2% conversion rate to from the search experience to the PDP. So there's something there in your search experience that's probably not driving people to click through on product options within the search experience. So there's an opportunity either with ranking or UX to increase the conversions there, and then looking at the actual PDP through the checkout experience, page to page conversions. You can start to see in the funnel where maybe you put high friction stuff within your funnel. You're asking too many questions up front, prepayment, and there's a lot of drop off and bounce. So when you actually start dissecting that funnel, you can see directly what the immediate things you can start working on are that are going to have the highest impact. So
Nice. Yeah, thanks
yeah.
for sharing more on that. So I do have a question. As far as the friction in that process is, did you guys have to add any or kind of to increase the quality of the intent at any point, or?
Yeah, that's definitely something I think that every place I've worked happens, right? No one wants
Okay.
unqualified leads. No one wants low quality leads. And I think when you look at VRBO, when you look at most of the marketplaces you guys have started, same with Outdoorsy, you have sign-in steps possibly, you have question steps where you collect more information. And the goal of some of those, or most of those, is probably twofold. One, account creation, so you can start revisiting people through lifecycle marketing touch points in either text or email campaigns. And then the other goal is to refine the lead a little bit before you hand it off to the other side of the marketplace. So if you're a peer-to-peer or a C2B, B2C, whatever you want to call it, marketplace, you want to make sure that the other person, the supplier, is actually getting some high quality leads. Otherwise, they'll bounce pretty quickly. That's one of the challenges of the marketplace, right? If it's
Yeah.
just pure unobstruction on both sides, it's just going to be a lot of bots and a lot of spam and a lot of low quality leads that never lead anywhere. So you do need to put up at least some account creation, some sort of qualification steps in most marketplaces, just to make sure that um, the leads that are actually getting through are worthwhile. And then two, it's a start off point for when you actually make the match. In most marketplaces, you have some sort of conversation step that ensues where people talk a little bit before they make their booking. Same with Airbnb and everybody else. And so giving some seed information there just to kick stuff off is always really helpful.
Yeah, it's a super insightful. So a question on that too, to kind of expand. So as far as is it typical that in the process on booking on Outdoorsy, is there typically a conversation prior to a booking request?
Sometimes. So, there's, I think on most of these vacation or travel related platforms, there's always a message owner step or message, manager, whatever the platform is. On Outdoorsy, we have a message owner step. So sometimes people will ask if an amenity isn't covered or if special request isn't covered. They might ask beforehand. But once you get into the conversion funnel, there is a description step that kicks off a match. So oftentimes people will just either book directly, ask questions during the booking process once the owner actually receives the request. That's probably the most used path. We also have an instant book option as well, which just kind of forgoes all of that and immediately takes payment and everything's done.
Yeah. So I've heard a lot about instant booking being critical to driving growth as far as for other marketplaces such as like Airbnb. When did you guys introduce that, and what did you see as far as the increase in bookings?
Yeah, I think we introduced it a little over a year ago, and so it's been around for a bit. I think at VRBO it had existed for quite a while when I joined. I think across the board, every place I've been and a lot of friends I've chatted with, instant booking or instant buying or whatever the option is, there's different flavors for every type of marketplace. Um, the result is almost always the same, which is there's more cancellations or people are trying to get out of the transaction more frequently. Sometimes it'll be owners who find it's a great lead opportunity. This was one thing at VRBO. A lot of owners would opt into instant book because it's a great lever to pull. People love it, so you get more bookings. But then they were still selective and they would cancel bookings.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing that you see. You also see a lot of bookers cancel across the board. I think that's the feedback I've gotten. So a lot of people will book and then cancel. They accidentally booked sometimes, or they didn't understand the implications. I think across the board, though, everyone I've chatted with, it's always the same thing. The number of cancellations net out. So it's instant book is still a positive feature. So even though you're getting cancellation, even though there's churn, overall it's neutralized because you're just getting more volume through in the first place. So I think that's probably the main feature. A lot of companies, if you look at like Airbnb and VRBO, they have a premier partner or whatever, these premium tiers where you have to set a certain satisfy a certain number of requirements. So you agree to have a certain response rate, you agree to have a certain cancellation rate, and those are checks and balances on the instant book feature for the most part. So most of the time these companies will institute those programs so that if you want to be an instant book listing, you have to ensure that your cancellation rate doesn't get above a certain limit. So it kind of prevents some of these bad actors things, which also helps with the net effect being positive for the business.
Yeah. So do you guys have like the checks and balance in place too? I'm assuming on that for the supply.
Yeah, we definitely do. I think most people do that have the instant book features on.
Yeah. How common is it? Was that something that you had to heavily message when you introduced that, or?
Yeah, I think it's something that we had to sell a bit. I think, again, a lot of owners, so suppliers in travel marketplaces and probably higher AOV marketplaces have an expensive asset. And so they're more selective with how people rent it or, who they're selling to or whatever. And so I think overall people are a little bit skeptical over instant booking or instant selling options because they're just a little uncertain about who the quality of the lead is going to be and if it's going to fall through and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's definitely, you have to be a little bit cautious with how you message it, how you sell it, and then you definitely have to have some checks and balances in place to make sure that the leads that are coming through overall are still positive and qualified, and they're not just getting a bunch of garbage. Because that's a great way to start implementing supply chain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I guess to kind of speak on that a little bit more. So I actually, I was doing my research prior to this chat. So I was listening to an interview, I guess, with Jen,
Mhm.
where she was mentioning the kind of pivot as a marketplace that was fairly significant from consumer to professional, which I don't know the exact time, but I wanted to ask a little bit about that and if you were part of the team then or after.
I was after, but I
Okay.
think it's always been the intent to have a professional supply first. I think overall, same thing at VRBO as well. They had Escapia and V12 as their professional supply management suite. I think there were acquisitions, and the intent there was to bootstrap a marketplace with professional supply first at VRBO, and then start aggregating peer to peer. So I think that's a pretty successful thing across the board. If you look at a lot of marketplaces, they'll start there and then move into peer to peer space. And
Mhm.
so I think that's what Jen was mentioning. Unfortunately, I wasn't here for that, but it's definitely still part of our DNA and really important part of the business.
Got it. Got it. And then what's as far as like the kind of blend of like consumer versus professional? Is it like for the main part just professional now or?
Yeah, I think we have a really healthy mix of everything. I can't get into too much detail with that, but
Yeah.
yeah, we have a lot of peer-to-peer listers on the platform. So
Nice.
yeah.
Nice. So so our I guess maybe can you talk a little bit more about kind of with and feel free to say pass on anything, but as far as with the focusing on the professionals and maybe building out kind of tools for them so that way they can more efficiently operate their business through your marketplace or
Yeah, so Outdoorsy has a product called Wheelbase, which is a dealership management software. Dealers here being professional renters. So they have fleets of RVs that they rent, and not dealers as in sellers. A little bit confusing, but yeah. So we have that tool. It was launched a while ago, and we have a lot of professional dealers across the globe using Wheelbase product to manage their inventory right now.
nice, nice. And then, so what, I guess I have a question as far as what are maybe some of the product kind of features that you've implemented that are significant drivers for growth I would say on the consumer side recently?
Yeah. Um, so I think there's three main things that I've really focused on a couple places in my career. I think one for consumer growth for all marketplaces. I think doubling down on SEO, not just content, but also tools and product features are really important. So if you're noticing that there's a lot of volume for your marketplace or for a specific piece of content within the domain of your marketplace, tapping into that's always really important. But then also, if you're noticing, like for instance, you have I don't know, bad example, but a computer science marketplace. I don't know how that would even work, but just having like a little calculator to convert hex to octal or something, like those little features that people are actually searching for, having those product features built into your experience help drive a lot of traffic. So that's one thing, which is pretty obvious on the organic side. I think two, understanding the user experience really tightly and going back to that problem stuff that I was talking about earlier, just understanding what the main problems people are trying to solve are. When I was at VRBO, one of the big things that we noticed was a lot of people were either a friends group or a group of adults or younger people traveling, and they would do a lot of collaboration around picking listings. And so the trip board feature was a result of that user research and understanding where the friction points were there, giving them a tool to just drop listings and collaborate and build out a trip experience for themselves there on the site, and then go through a conversion experience. I think that's another big thing. So understanding what the friction points are and actually making a decision and trying to address some of those. I think discovery is another big thing too. I know at VRBO we launched a new search experience last year, and I think across the board, everywhere I've worked, search has been one of the key drivers. I know little search tweaks at a scaled marketplace can net millions of dollars in revenue. So if you're better at ranking, even marginally so, then all of a sudden you're reaping the benefits of that matching increase, right? And that nets into a lot of conversions. So I think on the consumer side, those are some of the big things. I think obviously when you're starting out, having a data science team and stuff is probably not going to happen. But just trying to cater the search experience as best you can to your consumers is going to net a pretty big win. Organic traffic's another big thing, and then any little friction points along the way that you can try to alleviate by building quick product features. It's a really great way to help accelerate stuff.
Nice. Yeah. So on the note of search, because I'm like super interested in that, and we actually have someone in the market in our group that was focused on that at a fairly large marketplace. So we've kind of had some discussions on that. Are there any specific kind of features maybe that stand out in your experience that have attributed to increased conversion maybe in search results?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two main buckets. One is user experience, and one is ranking. So if you're just looking at the user experience side of things, advice to everybody is, get in Hotjar, some of these user tracking things, do user testing, and just figure out the easiest way for a user to actually search for the results they need. And what I mean there is some search experiences use a map, some don't, some have tiles, all these little nuances, but they're all nuanced and focused on the specific use case. So like for instance, in the travel space, you want to know where whatever you're trying to book is. So you need a map view. Same with Yelp and other people. But maybe on Uber Eats, you don't because you're connecting yourself to some unit of food that's going to get dropped off at your front door and you don't really care where it is. You just care about how long it's going to take. So I think on the user experience side, just understanding what the motivations are for your users and then how to best satisfy that through a really simple, clean user experience is going to be key. I think, one little hacky tactic that I've used over the years, especially when working on personal projects and stuff, is just look at your competitive landscape, see what other people are doing, and be informed by that. Because I think with user experience stuff, especially, people get used to patterns. Novelty is not necessarily great because if it's new and different, it's also harder to use, and you have kind of a barrier to entry. You have to learn how to use the product. So just reference your competition or other people in the space that do things well, and try to improve upon that. The other thing is ranking. So just ensuring that your matches are satisfying a user's search intent. So that's a bit harder. I think you can get pretty far with just some simple heuristics and some simple rules. Understanding what makes a great unit of supply. Is it high review rating or high purchase rate or something? And starting to rank all of your inventory by those things. And then understanding on the consumer side, what do they really want? And trying to match that. You can get fancier and fancier and start, personalizing your search results, tailoring the experience to each person. But of course, that requires a large capital investment to actually get that stuff done. So I think you can get pretty far with just the user experience side and some simple rules. And then, if everything's going great and you guys are growing, then that's the time to kind of pull the trigger and start looking at search opportunities. Yeah. There's a lot of off-the-shelf packages too for search that work pretty well.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice because I think a lot of us in the group are kind of in the earlier stage, and maybe we're thinking about, we should be using some of these tools, for instance, like Hotjar, and start to make more data-informed decisions.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's excellent. At what stage would you say that at Outdoorsy did you start kind of implementing some of that yourselves?
Yeah, I think we did it fairly early on. I think, from the moment I joined until now, we've been doing that. I think when's the right time for a marketplace to start doing that stuff? I think it's always the right time to do user research, and you don't even have to spend any money on it. You can print stuff out on your printer and stop people in the street, talk to your friends, talk to users, and just ask them to touch the page to navigate through. and give feedback live there. I think that's a great way to do things. Hotjar and some of these other user tracking tools are really cheap, and so the barrier to entry there is pretty low, and you get a lot of information from it. And just watching a few sessions, watch 5 sessions, and you can find a wealth of information. Plus, it's just kind of sad and fun at the same time, seeing all the friction points that you missed and all the other stuff that you've missed along the way. So I've always gotten a lot of use out of that. But I think you can go low tech, and you can start right away and just print stuff out. Bring your laptop around. People will do a lot of stuff for you if you're asking nicely, and they're always willing to give advice.
Yeah, definitely. So also I think I was saying it wrong. I was saying VRBO, and was it VRBO? Is it correct?
They rebranded, so yeah.
Okay, cool.
Called VRBO.
Yeah.
Vacation rentals by owners, and then they rebranded to VRBO.
Got it. Okay. So maybe, your product experience there versus kind of like Outdoorsy. Obviously they're not, the same marketplaces, but could you maybe kind of speak to some of the key differences in your experiences there?
Yeah. As a marketplace or any business grows, there's layers of abstraction between, leadership, strategy, and then execution. So I think some of the biggest places I've worked, especially like at Google, there's still a pretty flat organization, but there's thousands and thousands of people working there. So many that people are actually duplicating products sometimes, and they don't know it. We work with great people that know a lot of stuff, but there's just a lot of stuff going on, and that's great for them because they have all that money coming in through ads. They kind of have a monopoly across the board on search, and they're able to do that. When you get to smaller companies, even large companies still, but smaller than Google, there's more of a focus on ensuring that your resources are being used wisely and tied to strategy. Then when you get to a really small company, that's super important. And so I think the main similarities are, for me at least, going from VRBO to Outdoorsy, obviously it's a marketplace, and I've been shocked at just how similar all these marketplaces are. Talking to people, helping people. Well, over the last 5 years, there's a supply side, there's a demand side in some shape or form, and a lot of the same problems around each of the marketplaces kind of arise. So that was all similar. I think going to an earlier stage company, you have to be scrappier, which I personally find really fun and exhilarating. There's a lot of opportunity. Everything's high touch, so no matter what you do, it's having a big impact on the business. The larger the company you work at gets, you have this little piece of a PDP, and that's what you focus on every year. Year in, year out, and you do a bunch of user testing there. As you get to a smaller and smaller company, the surface increases and increases, which is super fun. I find it super fun. So that's one thing. I think similarities around how strategy and stuff is set is there. So I think just anchoring strategy to metrics, coming up with a tight strategy and goals for the team and everything else. Translated from most of my experience, Google, Twitter, VRBO, it's all centered kind of around OKRs and KPIs, which I think are really important for any product team to make sure you have some sort of goal and you're tracking all your work against that goal to ensure that you're actually adding value.
Yeah. So yeah, that's great. Could you maybe, I know this is just like kind of like a general question, but for those of us that are looking to kind of introduce that, what are some of the, some that you would suggest?
Yeah. I think there's different opportunities and times to use different things. I think if you're at a stage where you have one goal and that's it, my advice to everybody would be, I'll rewind a little bit. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I think having one goal and being focused, especially when you have limited resources, that's great. I think that leads to success. I think there's that general wisdom, go narrow and deep and capture the entire market before you move anywhere else. I really subscribe to that. I think it's important because if you're leaving a bunch on the table and you move to the next thing, then you're just leaving opportunity out there. And if you keep doing that, you never really capture much. So I think if you're just focused on one thing, setting a KPI and then figuring out what the levers are. So for instance, if you're focused on contribution margin, There's a lot of different things you can do to impact contribution margin. Maybe it's reducing fixed costs or the tooling costs and stuff like that. Maybe it's introducing new monetization points or new things you're selling. So understanding what all those levers are and then how they kind of nest into that KPI is really important, and understanding and kind of ranking them by priority order. So, hey, look, if I do this, this, and this, that'll have the biggest impact. Maybe these other three things are lower. And understanding what that stack rank looks like is really important. And then you can kind of hit the ground running at making a roadmap and deciding on what product features or products you want to build with a really firm understanding of how that's going to impact your business. As you start scaling, then introducing objectives and key results, I think, is a great format or framework. That's what I've always used. Google is really big on it. I think there's different ways you can organize those as well. You can have a company top line objective and key results with 3 or 4 nested key results, and then everything rolls into those. You can have 3 or 4 company goals, and then have all of your objectives and key results nest into those. One is just kind of taking objectives and key results to their natural conclusion so that everything's kind of nested within them. Another one is just setting high level goals and having all the teams set their own objectives and key results. But I think those are great too, because then you have an objective that's maybe a user experience objective or a product objective that's more long term, and you can set sustaining goals across multiple quarters or whatever period of time you're planning in. And then you can change the key results along the way. So let's say you have a key result of increasing conversion from 1% to 2%. So that'd be awesome. For most people, doubling conversion would be great. And maybe you do that in 1 quarter, but your objective is build a world-class whatever experience. You can take that same objective and continue through, and then just update your key results next quarter. So
Nice. That's super helpful.
Yeah.
So, well, cool. Well, we're gonna just jump right into questions if that's okay. Unless there's anything in particular you wanted to share.
Nothing in particular. I think one thing I've noticed in the marketplace is a lot of people asking about metrics and like what matters and what doesn't matter. So I can share a bit of insight there, at least from my experience, and pass that along to everybody else. But I think one of the main things I've seen, every investor always cares about your LTV to CAC. And so when you're looking at your marketplace and trying to understand what metrics to really zero in on, I think looking at that lifetime value and customer acquisition cost are really important, because if you can get a really high ratio there, 2 to 1 or 3 to 1, it's going to be really interesting to investors. A lot of different ways you can do that. Obviously, with higher AOV marketplaces, that's harder. But with lower ones, it becomes more of a exercise in life cycle marketing and reactivating your customers, getting them to repeat. And then I guess on the customer acquisition cost side, just focusing on organic early on, I think is really important. A lot of people will start paying for traffic. I see it. I don't know if you guys watch like The Profit and Shark Tank and all this stuff, but I always look at the companies afterwards, and a lot of them are firmly grounded in like social marketing, paid marketing, performance marketing, and then I check on them 6 months later and they're not there anymore. And I think a lot of times people get into that loop and will pay for traffic, and they never focus strategically on organic channels early on, and then the company scales and grows, and then they have to figure out how to pivot. And I know at VRBO that was a big focus. They were a listing site for a long time. They paid for a lot of traffic, and then all of a sudden Expedia bought them, and they pushed a lot of rigor towards them. And one of the big focuses there was on organic channels and growth there. So I'll pass that on. I think it's really important when you guys are starting out to focus on that, because if that's your goal, to have a high LTV to CAC ratio from when you're starting out, it'll make funding and stuff a lot easier further down the road. And I think too, just being mindful of your conversion metrics along the way and contribution margin metrics. Those are all kind of a basket of metrics that are intimately linked and tied together, but just keeping your contribution margin in a good spot and driving your conversion rate up every step of the way, that'll all have an impact on your LTV to CAC ratio as well. So anyways, I just wanted to pass that along. I've seen a lot of questions about it, and I think it's really important, and probably something that a lot of people don't think of immediately. You're thinking more about conversion and just traffic growth. But making sure that you're doing it the right way is going to set you up for a lot more success later on.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for adding that for sure. So.
Cool.
Cool. So let's start with some questions from the group. So let's see. What's up, Pierre? You wanna come on if you have a question? We'll see if we got.
Yeah, I do actually. Thank you for calling me out. I'm a huge fan of Outdoorsy, obviously. The thing I was most interested in is to learn more about Wheelbase Pro. I find it an excellent way to extend your revenue, to get into marketplace supplier tools. And so how was that choice motivated? How well is it working today? And it's probably confidential, but what's the split between the volume of business you get through the marketplace itself versus the B2B tool that you put in place for your owners?
Yeah, so some of that stuff is confidential, but I can talk as much as I can about this. So I think it was motivated early on. That's one of the first things the founders built was Wheelbase. So getting a lot of professional supply into the tool, understanding their pains, trying to solve their problems was really important to the business. And then as far as mix goes, can't really share much there. Like I said earlier, though, it's really healthy. We have a lot of different segments represented, and yeah, there's a nice balance between everything. And sorry, I think you had one more question. I just can't remember it.
I guess following up your answer is what I wanted to know is how, what was the main driver I mean, it must be tricky to drive both the growth of the marketplace itself and at the same time you're a full software company selling a SaaS. Maybe if you can share a bit of the key factors that made it possible to push that software. I mean, it's probably a totally different business.
Yeah, and again, like I said, at VRBO, same thing. They have Escapee and V12. That was core to the business. So I'll share a bit about that first, and then about Outdoorsy, because I think they complement each other pretty well. But VRBO was like almost a separate business unit. They had a separate product team. I mean, we're all part of the same company, but they had a sales team and everything else that was managed. So I think with a lot of the professional supply management software in a lot of these marketplaces, and I think some of them obviously don't have it, but a lot of them do. It becomes a B2B software play, so you have to have a sales team, you have to have people doing outreach. Obviously, it's a lot different than consumer product management, where you're trying to guess. Well, not guess, but you're looking at data and you're trying to understand user behaviors and how to address problems. It's a B2B software play, so you're getting all that feedback every day from your sales team, from your customers. They have a lot more rigorous needs, and so the way that really grows is through a sales team. I think depending on the marketplace, though, you could probably have more of a online sales presence depending on what you're selling. I think for something like vacation rental management software or dealership management software, you're dealing with smaller businesses. They probably do need to have some sort of sales team there to show them what's there, what the value props are. But if you look at some of these other B2B software tools like, I don't know, Asana or Slack or something, they've done a great job of selling through just online, right? They have direct traffic coming in and buying their software products. So I'd imagine if you could figure out a way to unlock that for your specific marketplace, that would be a massive opportunity. Plus then too, if you have something that's catered to more of a lower value concentrations market segment, you could offer less So it could be more like Asana and less like Jira, and less specialized, which is great because then it's a lot easier to manage. You can get more people onto the platform, and you can grow it by moving up market and adding features and stuff as you mature. I think for some of these other tools, especially like property management or dealership management, they're pretty rich software products to start with, and so it's just a bit of a different business. But I don't know. I always thought that was kind of interesting. If you could find some sort of B2B online software product to bootstrap a marketplace with, and you could have a lot of organic growth there, generate demand, kind of like Slack did with being the preferred tool for whatever that segment is, you could probably get a lot of free growth really quickly and bootstrap a marketplace pretty fast.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
So, hey, Andrew, so I actually have a question for you. So you mentioned that at VRBO that you had independent product teams, and it was in essence kind of run like its own standalone company. So is that something that you guys do or are looking to do at Outdoorsy?
No, I have the full product team kind of together. I think one of the major benefits of keeping people tight is that everyone knows what's going on across the platform. I think one of the challenges is if you have a lot of different product lines and product segments, people can be kind of cloistered away and then not be informed about opportunities and products that are built elsewhere. For instance, let's say you're updating some backend service with a bunch of new rich information and you're sitting in another product team somewhere else. You might miss the opportunity to leverage some of that stuff. So I try to keep everybody as tight and informed as possible because I think that really assists in information sharing and product development and stuff like that.
Cool. And then I actually I want to ask a question. I'll let someone else. So cool, we got it.
Oh, Howard.
Let's see if we got any.
I've got a quick question. Hey, Andrew, how's it going? Levi here. So I know you highlighted a little bit about like a high LTV to CAC sort of ratios, and then depending on each marketplace, right? AOV tends to differ, and sometimes you hear about like 60-day paybacks, 90-day paybacks. I think I'd love for you to kind of talk a little bit about like, let's just say you're a marketplace that perhaps is super niche, and so when you look at market comps or how to figure some of those numbers out, what are some like unique ways or what are some unique tools that one can use to figure out, hey, you know what, I'm estimating that an RV owner means X to me because within the first 90 days X customers will book that thing, and like this is how much we'd be able to sort of make.
Yeah, are you talking about more on the opportunity sizing side? Like you don't have anything built, you're just looking at the opportunities, trying to assess them, or something's built, but now you're trying to kind of figure out what your targets are, your goals?
Actually, to be a bit more pointed, probably more on the opportunity side, on the supply side, right? Of like trying to figure out like, what is the LTV, on the supply side?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I don't have a great answer because I think it really depends on what you're selling. I think even with high AOV items, you can do pretty well. So here's an example. If you're looking at just high AOV items and like repeat rate, how often the frequency they're actually making a second purchase. Let's say you're looking at guitars, and you're looking at a specific segment around, this is maybe surprising to some people. There's a lot of doctors and lawyers that just buy and sell guitars, expensive ones, and they just have a bunch of them. If you're looking there, the repeat rate's probably pretty high. The frequency would be pretty high, and you can. I think the easiest way to figure stuff like that out is to actually talking to people. So, hey, how many fancy guitars do you buy a year? What do you have? How often are you looking? What are you searching for? So just understanding what an actual user's intent is, getting some survey information would be really useful. Because then once you get outside of that segment and you start looking at other, let's just say guitar purchasers, you'll find that the spread on frequency is pretty wide. So you might have the doctors and lawyers buying a new guitar every month because they have the money to do it, and you might have the new musicians buying their first guitar and they never buy another one for the most part. Because they don't ever pick the instrument up, and then there's probably some intermediate classes in there. But I think the easiest way is to go out and actually interview people, understand how frequently they're going to actually use or they perform the action that you're trying to target, and then build your thesis around that. Because a lot of times there's just not a software product that does that. The reason I use a guitar is I was growing up, my stepdad ran a pawn shop, and so I worked there on the weekends, and I would see people coming in, and there was definitely 4 or 5 tropes that would come in and buy guitars, sell guitars, and I started to kind of understand the frequency of those things. And so I think there's just a lot of information you can get there. I think too, if you're just looking at opportunity sizing, there's a lot of non-marketplace solutions to problems, and they're not going to share their information with you because they're scared of being chewed up and spit out. But you can probably surmise a lot. So let's say you're looking at I don't know, HDMI cables. You could go into probably Amazon and just scrape some data and see how often sellers are selling out of those cables versus looking at some of the other people in the landscape. Just understanding what the frequency is there. And there's a lot of reports out there too that just give information around the market size, not necessarily on the frequency side, but I usually start there, get market sizes, TAMs, and then I'll talk to some people, understand what frequency is, build some hypotheses around that, and then kind of start working back from there.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yep. Any more questions? Let's see. Kyle, you want to jump in?
No, I'm just really listening in to everyone. Just taking notes.
Awesome.
So I've got another question, and this is more so about we talked a little bit about it, like using a Hotjar, using these different tools to really understand data. And so let's just say if you're starting today, like of course I know there's high importance of how you understand data and how it sort of flows throughout your system. So aside from tools, what are some things that folks should really be looking at, as they're trying to set up data flow and to understand like how to, improve at each sort of stage?
Yeah. So I guess it depends on how you're tracking stuff. I assume most people are using eventing, and so they're triggering events when people click on UI elements. So just making sure you have all your data pipelines set up, and then some sort of tracking software on top of that, I think is important. Like you said, though, I think you could probably get away with just tracking maybe non-software related metrics, like going into like GA or Google Analytics and looking at just like traffic volumes and then sales and stuff to start off with. But I think if I was starting something out, the first thing I'd want to know is just conversion metrics throughout the funnel. So I think my first move anywhere I'd go is making sure I understand what the user journey is. So building some flowcharts around what your supply and your demand side, each of the marketplace looks like, from listing as an owner all the way through getting your first booking, and what that flywheel looks like. And same on the owner side or renter side or demand side. I would set those up first. Those aren't even metrics, but I think that's pretty important because it'll tell you a lot of information about where you've messed up, what opportunities you have. And again, if you set those flows up and then you ask some questions, you get some feedback, you'll find that there's probably more problems that people are trying to solve along the way that you just don't account for. And maybe that's fine. Like I said, I'd rather focus and go narrow and deep and then start looking at other opportunities. But if there's a high friction piece that you've set up that's unintentional and it's booting people and they're bouncing along the way, then that'd be really important. And that requires no data. So I think getting the flows really tight, understanding what they look like, is important. I think a lot of times people will build stuff out and they don't have like that higher level conceptual understanding of what that funnel looks like. So I build that up first. And you could even factor in stuff like traffic source and other stuff, even if you don't know where it's coming from. You could say, look, my goal is to have a really low customer acquisition cost. So I want organic traffic coming in. Here's the 4 levers or 4 ways I can do that. I'm going to print some cards out, toss them out in the street, at South by Southwest, if that ever happens again. And then I'm going to, focus on SEO content and direct links. And that's what I'm going to do. Links. And then you can say, that's the top of my funnel entry point, and this little sliver is maybe direct traffic. Here's what happens in my search experience. Here's what happens on my listing page. Set some goals that way. Then get all of your eventing orchestrated. I think the first thing I would do is not worry about getting an event on every element throughout the funnel. I'll just focus on tracking conversions along the way, making sure that you know for a visitor, how far they got down the funnel and where they dropped off. And I think just with that information, you can do a ton. If you know your traffic source and you know where the drop-off points are, without knowing anything else, you can still optimize for a great LTV to CAC ratio, right? You can make sure that your customer acquisition costs are low because you're getting all that organic traffic, and that your conversion rates are high. So, that obviously boosts up your LTV. I think that's the main stuff. I think the other thing I would look at is probably life cycle, and then life cycle eventing. So like when you trigger life cycle emails or SMS or whatever you're using, push notifications, just getting that stuff orchestrated. And then I think the last thing I'd look at is breaking people into cohorts, so tracking for a given set of visitors or transactions that happen, what are their user IDs, tracking them over time, just understanding what your repeat rate is. And you can get low tech and just track accounts and see how often people are repurchasing and stuff, but as you mature, you'll want to get more mature with how you're actually tracking those cohorts.
I have a question now that you're talking about segmenting different people into different like cohorts. So we've been looking at some of the data that we had, and we're trying to increase repeat customers. We have one customer that we've known since we've been doing ordering. They literally ordered from the exact same truck every single week since we've been there, which is like kind of an anomaly. But then we have other people that are ordering they've ordered like 3 or 4 times, but from like different trucks. So we're trying to figure out like how can we get repeat orders. I've done some like research online as far as like just sending them like personal emails or just trying to get them to like do different things. But have you seen any other methods as opposed to like email or text to kind of get people to order again, like whether it's through the UX or UI, or what have you seen to be the best thing to help in that situation?
Yeah, and just refresh me, I think good find. I read about you had like an investment deck, so you're a platform for food trucks, is that right?
Yeah, so we're a platform for food trucks. So we give food trucks the ability to take pre-orders. So customers, so they're able to set their schedules. People know exactly where they are, and then customers can pre-order up to 5 days ahead in advance from those food trucks.
Awesome. And on the platform, can you search for different food options by category and stuff like that?
Yeah, so you can search some different categories. A lot of times what we've seen if people use them is that, so before they go to a property, they pretty much, before a truck goes to a property, they'll send out some marketing material, whether to the property or property manager, and they'll kind of like so the funnel is the customer goes through that email, sees the email, sees there's going to be a truck nearby. On our main page, we have trucks, we have it pretty much like order ahead, and then we have today's date, Monday or tomorrow, and then the following dates up to 5 days. So customers can go on and actually, like, that's the first thing to see is like where they can order from. And so they'll be able to see like which truck is like closest to them, depending on each date.
And is your area of business in a certain city, or is it multiple cities? I think you had like the East Coast or something kind of outlined when I looked through your investment material.
Yeah, right now we are based in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, but we're kind of focused on, a lot of trucks are going in the for Northern Virginia area right now. So most of the time, like that's where a lot of the sales are being made and where the trucks are going.
Yeah, so I'll give you some ideas. I don't know how good they are, but I think one thing I've seen work really well, there's a company here called 5 Star. They focus on discounts, and other people are in the space too. I don't know how tight your margins are if you want to give that up, but I do know that I get a lot of activations you could probably emulate,
Mhm.
where they say things like, "Hey, looks like you haven't been to Juice Land in a long time. Would you like to go?" And then I think, no, maybe not. And they're like, "Well, here's a 25% coupon if you go right now, or you get a free thing or whatever." So that's one thing you can do, and you could probably pass that along, the cost along, maybe to the trucks, and say, "Hey, look, do you want to opt in for this campaign? We'll send these emails out. You don't have to pay anything for it, but you do have to give up a free thing." That's one thing I'd look at. And that kind of reminds people that you're the platform and it's not the food truck itself. So people have more of an affinity for Good Find and not so much for, Papa Giorgio's Hamburger Shack or whatever. I think you want to build the brand affinity a lot for your products, and you're the gateway with which people discover things. I think that's what Uber does really well, right? You go to Uber Eats and you just want to find food, and you know that they have a great network, they deliver fast, blah, blah, blah. So that's one thing. I think too, if your AOB, your area of business, is pretty big, and I don't know what your numbers look like, but maybe that means the frequency of available trucks is lower for people, so it's harder for them to be able to find a truck near them frequently. One piece of advice might be scope it down a little bit, focus on one area, get a really big network of trucks in that one area, and then really drive traffic to the Good Find app. Say, hey, here's how you find food trucks. Here's how you can order food, and focus on that. And I think you'll probably start seeing repeat go up in that case, because then people can reliably find a truck near them at any given point, and then you can start scaling that way. Obviously, there's probably challenges to that, but that would be my first thing. I think when I try food apps, the big thing I find is that there's not a lot of options on most of these apps when I try them, which means that I don't come back because there's just not a lot of opportunity for me to vary what I purchase. And then you might think of, I don't know, other little things like a stamp card where, again, you pass the fee on to or the hit on to the trucks, but buy 10 get one free kind of thing. That's, I know, pretty traditional, but it works. There's a hamburger place I go to a lot. They send me a lot of SMS and email marketing campaigns where it's like, hey, you have 5 stars out of 10. Come today and you can get an extra star, or don't forget to fill your card up. So there's little things like that you can do. I think the biggest thing for me would just be focusing on as much supply as you could in a given market, and then trying to do as much organic marketing as you could to drive demand, but I'd focus it in one smaller area so that it's easy to find. Especially now, I feel like you have a good opportunity with people being cooped up and stuck at home. But they have to have access to trucks as frequently as they want. And I suspect the person that uses your platform a lot probably has a truck that's by them, and so they just use it a lot. And that's why you're seeing that repeat rate, and they like the food. So I don't know. That would be my consideration. I guess there's a challenge too, because you're not in control of the quality or the type of supply that you're actually generating.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult from that way, but solutions make a lot of sense.
Yeah, but as the options increase, then so does the opportunity for matching somebody to the thing that they want. So even if you don't have control over the quality, if you just have a lot of options, people are really a lot more likely to find something they want.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries.
Well, we're pretty much running up on our time here, but I really appreciate it, Andrew. And is there anything that you kind of wanted to leave us with before we wrap it up?
I'll just plug one more time. I think for everybody, especially in the product space, make sure that you're focusing on problems, not creating your own. I think a lot of times people have a habit of chasing a shiny object or something that's fun. But your job is to actually find real problems and solve them for people. So I always try to anchor people on that. Always make sure you're using a scientific method, observing things, forming a hypothesis, testing it, and iterating. A/B tests are really invaluable, but so are user testing tests and just printing docs out and handing them out to people and getting feedback. any opportunity you have to collect feedback is going to be paramount. And then just focusing on the right metrics early on, I think, are really important, and keeping your focus really tight, not letting a lot of extra things in along the way, because every time you do that, it degrades the throughput you have and your opportunity to really build a great experience with your core product. So
awesome. Well, this has been super insightful. So once again, appreciate the time for joining us and sharing. And and then where can we follow you? So I'll definitely plug your Twitter.
Yeah, sure. I'm probably the most boring Twitter person. I'm not super active, but it's @andcunning, ANDCUNNING. Probably post a lot more on LinkedIn. Andrew Paul Cunningham. I think there's a link in the channel. And then outside of that, I think that's about it. Always happy to help people if they have any questions. I do mentoring at Techstars. And so always happy to mentor people, help people out, give advice and feedback. I just really like marketplaces and online businesses and products. So, if you ever need anything, feel free to reach out and I'll be more than happy to help.
Awesome.